This is Hi folks, this is Jason. Hope you're okay today. This is an article that I wrote for a magazine, and I'm giving it in lecture form, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed writing it. About Emily Bronte. The Greek myths and the legends of medieval Europe mingle fact and fiction to produce superhuman figures that at all times can be convincing, but are actually sheer nonsense, and yet they never fail to fascinate us. The biographers of Emily Bronte seem at times to fall into this tradition. They have created a woman with their flamboyant imagination, where there is little fact, but much fiction. The question then is, who is Emily Bronte? Is as elusive today as when first asked after her death. Emily Bronte was born in Thornton, Yorkshire, on the 30th of July 1888. And fourth daughter of the Reverend Patrick and Maria Bronte. The family moved to the village of Haworth, Yorkshire, and in 1820 Emily's mother died there. The next year, 1821, the Reverend Bronte was worried now because he could not look after his motherless children. He thought that marrying again would solve his problems. His attempts at courtship all failed. Eventually his wife's sister said that she would come and look after the children. This was a great load off his mind, and he was even more relieved when the children started going to school. In 1824, two of his daughters, Maria and Elizabeth, went to the clergy daughters' school at Cowden Bridge. They were followed by Charlotte in August and Emily in November. In 1825, an epidemic hit the school, killing Maria and Elizabeth. Naturally, Charlotte and Elizabeth were weighed down with grief, and both returned home. For the next 2 years, Emily stayed at home. It was here that she and her sisters learned to write prose and poetry. The tale goes that their father brought home some toy soldiers for the children in 1826. Immediately they began to write about them. Charlotte and their brother Branwell created an imaginary realm in Africa called Angria, and Emily and Anne broke away, inventing their own realm called Gondal, which was set in the Pacific Ocean. The first mention of this C.S. Lewis type world occurs in their diary in 1834. In 1831, Charlotte was sent away to attend a school in East Yorkshire. In 1835, she became a teacher here. Emily joined her sister as a pupil that same year. She soon left because she was so homesick. Returning back home, Emily found Branwell here, and he had just returned from London after failing to make his mark as a painter. Desperately wanting to be independent, in 1838 she acquired a post as assistant teacher at Low Hill School, Halifax, which was run by Miss Patchett. The attempt at being independent was doomed to failure, for she was not able to fulfill her post as a teacher adequately. This was due to a lack of formal education, a difficult, shy nature, and homesickness did not help. So, at the plus age of 20, Emily returned home. To combat boredom, she wrote poetry. Her sisters at this time made spirited but unsuccessful attempts to become governesses, but the Bronte sisters were not beaten. As Emily wrote in 1841, they nursed a cherished ambition to start their own school. This was a bold step, and they knew that in order to succeed in such a venture, they require foreign languages. With this in mind, Emily and Charlotte went to Brussels to the pension Net Hege, where they learnt French and German. Emily and Charlotte had a privileged position at the pension Net Hege, being both pupils and teachers. Students at the institute reported that Emily was too reserved for their taste. On the other hand, the scholar M. Hege noticed her promising intellectual gifts. It is interesting to note that Emily's surviving exercise books reveal a woman possessed with unparalleled imaginative power. All in all, the sisters' stay at Brussels was fruitful. They both became proficient in French, while Charlotte mastered German as well. The two sisters returned home in 1842 because of the death of their aunt. They were already grieving the death of their father's curate, William Whiteman, and their friend Martha Taylor of Brussels. Charlotte returned to Brussels after her aunt's funeral because she was tormented with pangs of love for Mr. Hege, but Emily stayed at home. For the next year, Emily was alone with her father Fort Greene with Anne. Then in the early months of 1844, Charlotte came back to the sisters' mutual jubilation. During this period, Emily spent her time copying her poetry into notebooks. They were entitled Gondel Poems. The Bronte family were now heading for a crisis. Charlotte been writing letters to M. Heger. The man absolutely refused to answer them. This caused Charlotte to slip into a dismal bout of depression. Also in 1844, the sisters' idea to start a school floundered through lack of enthusiasm. On top of this, the Reverend's health began to deteriorate, adding to the family's worry. Things could not have been worse until Branwell arrived home. He had been dismissed from Fort Greene, and the reason was never revealed by the Brontes. Suffice it to say, it was shocking. It brought shame on the family, and even made Anne in turmoil that Emily wrote her best poetry and her immortal novel Wuthering Heights. While writing, Emily hid her work from the family's view. Everybody was oblivious to her literary genius. Then in 1845, Charlotte discovered the poetry notebooks and thought the poems to be excellent. But when Emily was told that her poems had been read, she was furious. The family tried to appease her, but she took weeks to cool down. Eventually, she was persuaded to let her poems be published, which they were, along with a collection of her sister's poems, in 1846. The same year, she wrote one more poem, Never to use this medium again. Her only novel was published in December 1847. Wuthering Heights, unlike Charlotte's Jane Eyre, did not immediately meet with success. Reviewers confessed that the novel baffled them. Some were shocked, yet a few critics in power. They realized that the very essence of the moors is what gives Wuthering Heights its flavor. The somber mood never abated from the Brontes' home. Ever since 1845, Branwell's health had deteriorated, culminating in his death on the 24th September 1848. Emily followed her brother a few months later, dying on the 19th of December 1848. The question now arises, what was the author of Wuthering Heights really like? Emily was undoubtedly intelligent. She could be difficult to live with at times. She was a person who thought passionately about things, and she tried with every ounce of her being to come to terms with the world around her. She looked into religion and the social order, but all she saw was inevitable despair. This was understandable, for she was above all a sensitive, frustrated and unfulfilled woman, full of pent-up emotion. All of this was poured out into her great achievement, Wuthering Heights. But with such deep private character, it is only possible to scratch the surface of Emily Bronte. Still remains and fascinating and intriguing as ever. So I hope you found that lecture of interest. Feel free to mirror this video if you want to use it. Just put my name on it if you can. But God bless you, and I hope that was a blessing to you. God bless you. Thank you for listening, and take care.